1.8 million years ago, researchers unearthed a child's skull in Kenya that belonged to the only human ancestor to survive 2 million years of apocalyptic climate swings, supervolcano eruptions, and mass extinctions that killed 97% of all other hominid species. While Homo erectus outlasted every evolutionary cousin that specialized and went extinct, they did it by breaking every rule of survival their ancestors followed. So what did they know about enduring catastrophe that we've completely forgotten? 1.8 million years ago, a child died near what we now call Lake Turkana in Kenya. A volcanic ash buried the small body so quickly that the bones stayed perfectly in place, waiting in the dark earth. When scientists finally lifted the skull into the sunlight in 1984, it fit easily between two hands, light as a coconut. They brushed away the gray dust grain by grain, and as the tiny face emerged, they realized they were holding something that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about survival. This child belonged to Homo erectus, a species that would walk the earth for nearly 2 million years. To understand how long that really is, imagine this. If you stacked 1 year on top of another like sheets of paper, Erectus would fill a stack taller than a 6-story building. Modern humans, our species, would barely reach your knees. Erectus didn't just exist for a long time. They thrived through conditions that killed almost everything else that walked on 2 legs. The numbers tell a brutal story. 97 out of every 100 hominid species that ever lived are gone forever. Paranthropus robustus, with its powerful jaws that could crack nuts like we crack eggs, vanished. Australopithecus sediba, with its clever climbing hands and upright walk, disappeared. Homo habilis, the so-called handy man who first shaped stone tools, left nothing behind but fossils and silence. One after another, our ancient cousins faced a world that changed too fast, adapted too slowly, and blinked out of existence like candles in a storm. But Erectus survived every ice age that rolled across the continents like a white wall of death. They lived through supervolcano eruptions that turned day into night for years and covered half the planet in ash. They watched forests turn to grasslands, rivers dry to dust, and entire ecosystems collapse and rebuild dozens of times. When the climate swung from freezing to baking and back again every few thousand years, Erectus bent but never broke. They were the last ones standing while bigger, stronger, more specialized species fell around them like dominoes. The small skull from Kenya holds a question that matters right now, today, as our own world shifts beneath our feet. Homo erectus wasn't the strongest hominid. They weren't the biggest or the fastest. Their teeth couldn't crush bones like their cousins could. Their arms couldn't climb trees as well as the species that came before them. Yet they outlasted everyone, spreading from Africa to Asia to Europe, building fires on 3 continents, raising children in ice and jungle and everything between. They survived 2 million years of the planet trying to kill them. And they did it by knowing something we seem to have forgotten. The question carved into that ancient child's bones is simple but terrifying. What did they understand about enduring catastrophe that we don't? The world that Homo erectus woke up in was trying to murder them every single day. Around 2.5 million years ago, Earth entered a period scientists call the Ice Ages, but that gentle name hides the truth. Imagine standing in a forest where your family has lived for thousands of generations, where every tree holds food you recognize, where water flows in streams your grandmother showed you as a child. Now watch those trees die. Not slowly, not tree by tree, but whole forests turning brown and crumbling to dust in the space of a single lifetime. The thick jungle that stretched to the horizon becomes a flat grassland where you can see for miles but find nothing to eat. The fruit your species survived on for millions of years simply stops growing. The fig trees that always bloomed dry up and stand like skeletons against the sky. Rivers that your ancestors drank from for centuries crack into mud patterns that look like broken glass. The temperature drops so fast that some mornings you wake to see your breath hang in the air like smoke, something no one in your family line has ever seen before. This wasn't a bad year or a rough season. This was the world changing its rules permanently, and it happened over and over again every 20 to 100,000 years, like a drumbeat of disaster. Other human species faced this nightmare the only way they knew how. They retreated. Paranthropus boisei, a cousin species with jaw muscles so huge they created bony crests on their skulls, specialized in eating tough roots and hard seeds. They became the best at surviving on difficult food nobody else wanted. Australopithecus africanus stuck close to the remaining patches of woodland, competing for every scrap of the old world that was left. Both of these strategies worked beautifully until they didn't. When the climate lurched again, when even the backup food sources vanished, these specialists had nowhere to go and nothing else to try. They had put all their survival eggs in one basket, and the basket turned to dust in their hands. Homo erectus made a different choice, one so strange it must have looked like suicide. They walked away from the trees completely. They stepped out onto the open grassland where there was no shade, no quick escape from predators, no familiar food within reach. But their bodies had changed in ways that made this possible. Their legs grew longer, their hips shifted, and suddenly they could run for miles without stopping. They could track herds of animals across distances that would kill other primates. Their brains grew larger, not just bigger like a balloon, but different in shape, with more space in the front areas that control planning and problem solving, and the ability to imagine what might happen tomorrow or next season or next year. Then Homo erectus discovered something that changed everything. They learned to control fire. Not just grabbing a burning branch when lightning struck a tree, but keeping flames alive day after day, feeding them, protecting them, carrying them to new places. Scientists have found hearth sites in South Africa where Erectus kept fires burning for months, maybe even years. The same fire tended by hands passing the responsibility from person to person like a sacred trust. Fire meant cooked meat that was easier to chew and gave more energy with every bite. Fire meant warmth on nights cold enough to kill. Fire meant light after the sun went down, extra hours to make tools and teach children and plan for tomorrow. And fire meant a gathering place, a spot where the old could show the young how to chip stone just right, where knowledge moved from one generation to the next, not through instinct but through watching and learning and remembering. By 1.8 million years ago, Erectus did something no hominid had ever done before. They left Africa. Not all at once, but in waves spreading across hundreds of thousands of years, with each group learning to survive in places wildly different from home. In Java, they figured out tropical rainforests, thick with plants and animals they'd never seen. In China, they endured winters with snow and ice that lasted for months. In a place called Dmanisi, in the country of Georgia, they built lives at the edge of glaciers that could grind mountains to powder. Each population faced a completely new world and survived anyway. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano called Toba exploded with a force that makes every modern disaster look tiny. It threw enough ash into the sky to bury the entire state of Texas under a blanket 3 feet deep. The blast triggered a volcanic winter that lasted 10 years, with temperatures dropping so fast and so far that most large animals simply died. Scientists think modern humans were reduced to maybe 10,000 people total on the entire planet, small enough that everyone alive could fit inside a large sports stadium. But Erectus populations in Southeast Asia held on. They hunted smaller prey. They moved their camps. They adjusted and endured and refused to disappear. What made Erectus different wasn't bigger muscles or sharper teeth. It was their ability to change their minds and their behavior when the world changed around them. Fossil sites show they took care of people who couldn't hunt anymore. In Dmanisi, scientists found the skeleton of a woman who lost a leg but lived for years afterward, which means other people brought her food and protected her when she couldn't protect herself. Erectus carried stones hundreds of miles to make tools, proving they could remember distant places and plan journeys that took weeks. Their hand axes, refined and perfected over 1 million years, show something remarkable. Erectus tools from Africa look almost identical to tools from Asia, made hundreds of thousands of years later. This means they didn't just make things that worked. They made things a certain way and taught that way to their children, who taught it to their children, passing down not just survival but culture, a shared agreement about how things should be done. While other species specialized in one perfect skill, Erectus remained generalists, jacks of all trades. They could hunt when animals were plentiful, gather plants when hunting failed, scavenge when both options disappeared. They could live in forests or grasslands, hot zones or cold ones. When one food source vanished, they simply switched to another. When their territory became unlivable, they picked up and moved. They bent with every punch the planet threw instead of standing rigid and breaking. Homo erectus finally disappeared somewhere between 140,000 and 100,000 years ago. But they didn't lose. They didn't go extinct in the usual way, wiped out by disaster or starved by climate change. Instead, they blended into us. Scientists have found Erectus genes still living in modern human DNA, proof that our ancestors met them and had children together. Erectus didn't vanish. They became part of us, their 2 million years of survival knowledge written into our bones and blood. Walk into any crisis happening right now, climate change or economic collapse or pandemic, and you'll see people split into 2 groups. Some dig in deeper, doing more of what used to work, building higher walls around narrower skills, insisting the old ways will save them if they just believe hard enough. Others adapt, learn new things, move to new places, find new people to work with, accept that the world has changed, and they need to change with it. History carved in ancient bones tells us which group survives. There's a fossil site in Java where Erectus remains span 1.5 million years. 75,000 generations in one spot, weathering ice ages and volcanoes, sea level changes, and the collapse of entire ecosystems. 75,000 generations of parents teaching children which plants heal wounds, which rivers flood in rainy season, where animal herds go when food gets scarce. That's not survival through being the biggest or strongest or smartest. That's survival through memory and flexibility, and the stubborn belief that the next generation deserves a future. The child whose skull lay buried in Kenyan ash knew nothing about species survival or evolution. But in their short life, they learned to read clouds for coming rain, to shape stone using techniques passed down through countless hands, to sit around a fire someone else kept burning. They learned to be part of the 3% that refuses to vanish, not through lone brilliance, but through shared knowledge and the courage to walk into an uncertain world carrying only wisdom and friendship. That lesson still works today. We just need to remember it before we become another fossil waiting in the dark. In the